Welcome. I'm just so glad you're joining us for this deep dive today.
Oh, yeah, this is a fun one.
It really is. Our mission today is to extract the absolute most mind-blowing takeaways from a Wikipedia article about a man whose life, I mean, it reads less like a biography and more like a grueling cinematic survival test.
Totally.
If a Hollywood studio received this script, they would reject it immediately for being utterly unrealistic.
It is genuinely one of those stories where the historical record defies common sense. You look at the timeline and assume one person couldn't possibly cram this much action, innovation, and just sheer catastrophe into a single lifetime.
Right.
But every bit of the source material we are looking at today is completely verified.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
We're talking about Eddie Rickenbacker, who lived from 1890 to 1973. And I want to give you, our listener, just a rapid-fire teaser of this guy's resume.
Buckle up.
He was a 7th-grade dropout who became America's ace of aces in World War I.
Wrong.
He was an Indy 500 race car driver, an automotive innovator who built his own car company.
Yep.
The owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He was the foundational architect of Eastern Airlines. And perhaps most bafflingly, he was a man who seemingly refused to die, despite the universe throwing its absolute worst at him over and over again.
It is a staggering list of accomplishments, but the mission of our deep dive today isn't just to recite his resume, We want to understand how he operationalized his life to achieve all of this.
Exactly. The how is what matters.
Because Rickenbacker perfectly embodies the rapid, brutal, and frankly dangerous technological evolution of the early 20th century. As we go through these events, consider how his specific mental model, treating everything from fear and risk to business and physical survival as a system of inputs and outputs, how that allowed him to thrive in pure chaos.
It's a systems thinking approach in the face of disaster.
Right, and that is something you can actually apply to the challenges you face today.
So let's start right at the beginning in Columbus, Ohio, because his early years were incredibly harsh. He was the son of poor German-speaking Swiss immigrants.
And to set the scene for you, his childhood home had no running water, no indoor plumbing, and zero electricity.
His father worked these grueling construction jobs, and his mother took in laundry just to keep the family fed. Rickenbacker was doing chores before and after school, basically handing most of his pennies directly over to his mom.
And amidst that poverty, a bizarre and crucial pattern emerges from the source material. He had this almost supernatural tendency to stumble into life-threatening accidents.
Oh, it's wild.
Before he even started school, he toddled directly into the path of an oncoming horse-drawn streetcar and was just barely snatched away.
Then he fell 12 feet down into an open brick-lined cistern.
Yeah, and his brother had to rescue him from being crushed by moving coal cars on 2 entirely separate occasions.
He even ran back into a burning school building just to retrieve his coat and nearly succumbed to the smoke and flames.
It sounds like he was just plagued by terrible luck.
Or maybe a total lack of childhood fear.
Well, it does seem like bad luck on the surface. But looking at his autobiography decades later, he processed it entirely differently. He synthesized all these near-death experiences and came to the firm conclusion that God had repeatedly saved his life for a higher purpose.
Wow.
When a child genuinely believes they are being preserved for something monumental, it instills a very specific, fearless psychology.
They stopped fearing the edge of the cliff.
Exactly.
And that psychology was forced into overdrive after a sudden family tragedy. When Eddie was 13, his father was struck in the head with a level during a street brawl and died weeks later in a coma.
Such a brutal shift for the family.
In an instant, Eddie felt this crushing weight of being the man of the house. He dropped out of the 7th grade, lied about his age to bypass the child labor laws of the era, and just threw himself into the workforce.
He bounced through 8 different brutal factory jobs in 2 years.
But the massive pivot in his life, the real turning point, came when he enrolled in a correspondence course for engineering.
That correspondence course is the skeleton key to understanding his entire life. It transitioned him from relying on sheer brute labor to developing a highly sophisticated mechanical mindset.
He stopped just looking at machines and started understanding them.
Right, understanding the underlying systems, how gears, combustion, and physics all interacted.
And he parlayed that knowledge incredibly fast. He transitioned from being a grease-covered mechanic to serving as a personal chauffeur for the famous politician William Jennings Bryan.
Which is quite the leap.
And then he eventually heads up a regional agency for the Columbus Buggy Company. By the time he was 18 years old, he was serving as a chief engineer, demonstrator, and salesman, pulling in $125 a week.
In 1910, that was a staggering amount of money for a teenager.
Unbelievable money.
What's fascinating here is the direct line from that deep mechanical understanding to his eventual, highly publicized racing career.
Because he wasn't just driving.
Exactly. When he started racing on dirt tracks, and eventually the Indianapolis 500, he wasn't just a guy with fast reflexes steering a wheel. He was actively diagnosing the engine's performance by sound and vibration while driving at top speeds.
A sports writer at the time dubbed him Fast Eddie, observing that he was the most daring and the most cautious driver in America.
And that is the first practical lesson of his life for you to take away. True daring is only sustainable when backed by deep technical expertise.
He could push a race car to its absolute breaking point because his systems thinking told him exactly where that breaking point was.
He was daring, but he was never flying blind.
But that racing career eventually pulled him into an entirely different kind of chaos. He traveled to England right in the middle of World War I to work on a new racing engine.
Oh, this story.
It led to this historically tense, almost comical international misunderstanding. Upon arriving in Liverpool, the British police immediately detained him as a suspected spy.
Because of a newspaper article, right?
Yeah, a completely fabricated newspaper article back in Los Angeles had claimed he was Baron Rickenbacker, the disowned son of a Prussian noble.
The irony is rich, considering his parents were Swiss immigrants, not Prussian nobility. But in a paranoid world at war, the Metropolitan Police weren't taking chances.
Not at all.
They kept him under strict surveillance for weeks, tracking his every single movement across London.
The heat was so intense that it forced a permanent change to his identity. He officially anglicized his name, changing the spelling from Rickenbacher to a K-E-R at the end, simply to avoid sounding like the enemy.
A highly pragmatic adjustment from a man who constantly evaluated his environment.
Completely.
And that pragmatic, systems-based approach completely defined his military service when the United States finally entered the war in 1917.
This is the moment his life shifts from the dirt and oil of the racetrack to the sky. He actually goes to Washington, D.C. with a formal proposal to create an aero squadron made entirely of professional race car drivers.
The logic behind that proposal was actually brilliant.
You would think so.
The cognitive load of wrestling a primitive, incredibly dangerous race car around a dirt track in 1916, managing speed, spatial awareness, and imminent disaster, is almost identical to the cognitive load of dogfighting in a canvas and wire biplane.
But the military brass completely dismissed the idea. They preferred college-educated cavalrymen for their pilot programs.
Typical bureaucracy.
But here's where it gets really interesting. He completely ignores the rejection. He enlists as an army driver, gets shipped to France, and just happens to fix a chronically broken car for a major who serves as General Pershing's aviation officer.
Talk about right place, right time.
And the right skills. He leverages that mechanical favor to get a job as the chief engineer at a flight school in France. From there, he essentially wears down his commanding officers until they allow him to undergo flight training himself.
He just finessed his way into the cockpit.
He finesses his way through gunnery school and officially joins the 94th Aero Squadron, the legendary Hat in the Ring gang.
His transition into an elite fighter pilot, however, was not immediate.
No, it was a rough start.
He learned under the mentorship of the famous French ace, Raoul Lufbery. And at first, Rickenbacker's performance was wildly impetuous. He pushed his machine way too hard. He nearly plunged to his death when the fabric tore completely off his wing during a reckless dive.
He even mistakenly fired on friendly Allied planes.
Right, he was relying on adrenaline rather than his mechanical discipline.
And it took a biological failure to fix his mental framework. He developed a severe ear infection, an abscess that literally grounded him and put him in a Paris hospital for weeks during a massive aerial campaign.
That idle time in the hospital bed was transformative for him. Stripped of the daily adrenaline, he reflected on his chaotic flying and realized his sheer impetuosity was a broken system. It was going to get him killed.
So he rebuilt the system.
He consciously developed a rigid mathematical set of rules for engagement. He vowed never to attack an enemy plane unless he had at least a 50-50 statistical chance of success. He taught himself the crucial, life-saving distinction between cowardice and common sense.
And when he returned to the front, the results were astonishing. He took command of the 94th Squadron and injected a completely new culture based on a concept he called being a Gimper.
A Gimper.
Yeah, he defined a Gimper as a bird who will stick by you through anything. His absolute golden rule for leadership was that he would never order a pilot to undertake a mission he wasn't willing to fly himself.
It is the ultimate manifestation of leading from the front, backed by immense technical skill.
He proved it immediately. Right after taking command, he launched a solo patrol over enemy lines and shot down 2 heavily armed German planes in a single morning.
Incredible.
That specific action earned him the Medal of Honor. By the time the armistice was signed, he had accumulated 26 confirmed aerial victories. He was the United States ace of aces, and those 26 kills remained the American record all the way until World War II.
That success was the direct result of marrying the fast Eddie, daring to the meticulous mathematical caution he developed in that hospital. He survived the deadliest airspace in human history because he treated aerial combat as a calculated mechanical problem to be solved, rather than some romantic duel.
The war ends, and he returns to America as a monumental hero. We're talking crowds of 600 people cheering him at the Waldorf Astoria. He embarks on Liberty Bond tours, traveling the country to convince the public to buy government bonds to help alleviate the massive national debt accrued during the war.
He was a superstar.
During this peak fame, Hollywood producers literally shoved a $100,000 certified check under his nose to star in a feature film. But he rejects it outright. He stated he didn't want to cheapen his image.
Instead, he funnels his energy back into machines. He founds the Rickenbacker Motor Company.
And true to his nature, he didn't just license his famous name to a generic vehicle.
No, he drove genuine engineering innovation. He introduced a tandem flywheel construction to his cars. For context, a tandem flywheel uses 2 flywheels instead of 1 to store rotational energy. This drastically smooths out the power delivery and nearly eliminates engine vibration.
It's brilliant.
But his most advanced and ultimately ruinous innovation was the mid-year introduction of 4-wheel brakes.
It's wild to think of 4-wheel brakes as ruinous when they are the absolute standard on every single car today.
He was simply too far ahead of the industry's timeline. When Rickenbacker introduced them, his major competitors, specifically Studebaker, were caught completely flat-footed. They didn't have the engineering ready to match him.
So they fought back dirty.
Exactly. Rather than competing on the assembly line, they launched a vicious marketing smear campaign. They took out full-page ads claiming 4-wheel brakes were inherently dangerous, suggesting they would lock up and cause cars to violently flip over or skid out of control.
Which was a complete fabrication.
Total lie. But it worked flawlessly. The public was terrified. The Rickenbacker Motor Company's sales plummeted to 0, and the company was driven into bankruptcy, leaving him saddled with $250,000 in personal debt.
To be entirely right about the physics of a machine, but utterly destroyed by public relations, is just a bitter pill. But Rickenbacker orchestrates this massive, multi-industry rebound.
He always bounces back.
He secures financing to buy the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for $700,000, effectively saving the track. He creates a wildly popular Sunday comic strip called Ace Drummond that eventually gets adapted into a film serial and a radio show.
He was everywhere.
And most significantly, he brokers a deal to buy Eastern Airlines for $3.5 million, transforming it from a struggling route map into a highly profitable commercial aviation juggernaut.
His tenure running Eastern Airlines really showcases his intense focus on operational safety, but it also placed him squarely in the crosshairs of the federal government.
Right, the 1934 airmail scandal.
Now, looking at this historical event impartially, simply observing the facts of policy and safety, we see a massive collision of ideals. In 1934, President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration decided to rescind all existing lucrative airmail contracts with private airlines, including Eastern.
And they handed the responsibility of flying the nation's mail over to the U.S. Army Air Corps.
Exactly.
Rickenbacker, understanding the deep technical realities of commercial flight, was fiercely and publicly critical of this executive decision.
His criticism was rooted in raw technical capability. Commercial pilots at that time were specifically trained to fly heavy aircraft on instruments through treacherous, blinding weather conditions along fixed routes,
while the Army pilots were not.
Conversely, the Army pilots were largely trained for visual day flying in lighter, tactical aircraft. When the Army took over the mail routes, the results were catastrophic. Several undertrained Army pilots crashed and died in severe weather.
Rickenbacker publicly blasted the Roosevelt administration's policy.
Right.
He famously called the situation legalized murder.
And the administration responded forcefully. They reportedly pressured NBC Radio to ban Rickenbacker from broadcasting further criticisms of the president's policies.
It is a striking historical clash. A renowned aviation expert, singularly focused on technical safety metrics, going head-to-head with presidential administration, attempting to restructure federal monopolies.
It perfectly illustrates how fiercely he guarded the systems he built. He viewed the deployment of untrained pilots into bad weather as a system designed to fail, and he refused to stay quiet about it regardless of the political cost.
This intense grip on survival brings us to what might be the most harrowing acts of his life. We have to talk about how this man continually defied the Grim Reaper long after his military days.
His crashes.
Yes. In 1941, he was flying as a passenger on Eastern Airlines Flight 21 when the plane clipped the trees and crashed violently in the woods just outside Atlanta. The aftermath was horrific. How bad were the physical injuries he sustained?
The list of trauma is difficult to even process. He suffered a badly fractured skull, a shattered left elbow, a completely crushed hip socket, a pelvis broken in 2 distinct places, a severed nerve in his hip, a broken knee.
Just brutal.
And the impact was so severe that his left eyeball was physically dislodged from its socket.
Oh my goodness.
The wreckage was so devastating that the press actually printed premature obituaries announcing his death. When his mangled body was finally pulled from the wreckage and brought to the hospital, the emergency room doctors assessed his injuries, looked at the trauma team, and explicitly ordered them to take care of the live ones.
They just wrote him off.
They abandoned him on a stretcher. They believed that allocating medical resources to a man so obviously close to death was a waste.
And he is fully conscious while this is happening. He is lying there on a stretcher, soaked in highly flammable airplane fuel, in unspeakable agony, listening to doctors declare him a lost cause. And through sheer, stubborn willpower, he refuses to die. After 4 grueling months in the hospital, he not only survives the crush injuries, but he inexplicably regains full vision in that eye.
It is a profound testament to the psychological fortitude he began building as an accident-prone child. He treated his own failing body as a machine that simply needed to be willed back into operation.
Mind over matter, literally.
And incredibly, his physical endurance would be tested even further during World War II, where he served the government as a civilian advisor.
In 1942, the Secretary of War dispatched him on a tour of highly sensitive Pacific air bases. He's flying across the ocean in a B-17 bomber when the equipment completely betrays them.
The crew was relying on an early celestial navigation tool called a bubble octant. It uses a spirit level, the bubble, to help navigators measure the exact angle of the stars against the horizon to determine their position.
But the octant on this Pacific B-17 was damaged.
Because the instrument's baseline was skewed, the mathematical calculations were entirely wrong. The plane flew hundreds of miles off its intended course, completely ran out of fuel, and was forced to ditch violently into the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean.
What follows is a 24-day nightmare. Rickenbacker and 7 crewmen are adrift and 3 tiny lashed-together life rafts. Their meager food rations run out after just 3 days.
They are subjected to severe sensory deprivation.
Baking under a blistering sun during the day, freezing at night, and desperately trying to catch passing rainwater in their clothes just to stave off deadly dehydration. One of the crewmen tragically succumbs to the elements and has to be buried at sea.
It was incredibly grim.
But on the 8th day, adrift in millions of square miles of empty water, an absolute miracle occurs. A small seabird, a tern, flutters down and lands directly on Eddie Rickenbacker's head.
The statistical improbability of that moment is staggering.
He knows any sudden movement will scare it away. Starving, exhausted, and barely clinging to life, Rickenbacker slowly reaches up and snatches the bird barehanded.
And that bird changed everything.
They consume the meat, but more importantly, Rickenbacker's systems thinking kicks in. He uses the bird's intestines as fishing weight to catch small fish, which they eat raw, and then use the remains to catch larger fish.
Because of his ruthless pragmatism and his Gimper leadership keeping the men from turning on each other, they survive until a Navy patrol plane finally spots them 24 days later.
He had lost 40 pounds, but after a mere few days of medical rest, he gets out of bed and completes his assignment. He delivers a secret verbal message to General Douglas MacArthur.
He viewed the ordeal not as a trauma to dwell on, but as an obstacle he had successfully navigated. The very next year, in 1943, he willingly takes on a high-stakes fact-finding mission to the Soviet Union. And he approaches this diplomatic mission with the exact same sharp, tactical mindset he used as a fighter pilot.
The details of this trip read like a tense espionage thriller. While touring the USSR, he is lavishly entertained by his Soviet hosts, who are eager to show off their hospitality while hiding their actual military logistics.
But Rickenbacker knows exactly what to look for.
During a visit to a command center, right as the massive Battle of Kursk, one of the largest tank battles in human history, is kicking off, his Soviet minders are momentarily distracted by incoming reports.
Just a tiny window of opportunity.
In that window, Rickenbacker spots a highly classified map detailing the exact locations and strengths of Soviet military units at the front. Relying on his intense focus, he memorizes the entire complex map in moments so he can accurately report the Soviet troop dispositions back to the United States War Department.
He never stopped operating.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the sheer density of Eddie Rickenbacker's life, from the dirt tracks of Ohio to the skies over France to a secret map room in Russia, you realize he wasn't just a beneficiary of extreme luck.
Not at all.
His massive success across entirely different industries was born from an absolute refusal to quit and a foundational mechanical understanding of the systems he operated within.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, and to you listening right now, Rickenbacker proves that true innovation and survival require systems thinking in the midst of chaos.
You have to understand the machine.
You have to take the leap, but you need to mathematically understand how the parachute functions before you pull the ripcord. Furthermore, his Gimper philosophy from World War I demonstrates that even extreme individual success still relies heavily on profound loyalty to the team around you.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to a final, entirely different thought for you to mull over today. Rickenbacker firmly believed that his horrific childhood accidents and the sheer physical trauma he endured early on prepared him for the impossible challenges of his adult life. In modern psychology, this phenomenon is often referred to as post-traumatic growth.
It really makes you evaluate how we structure our lives today. In our pursuit of ultimate safety, how often do we obsessively over-coddle ourselves or our children to prevent any sort of failure or injury?
That's a great point.
By removing all the friction, are we accidentally preventing the exact kind of grit, resilience, and systems-level thinking required to survive the inevitable crashes of adult life? If Rickenbacker had never fallen into that cistern, would he have had the mental fortitude to survive 24 days adrift in the Pacific? Think about your own skill set. What completely unrelated, terrifying field could you conquer today if you applied the exact same daring but cautious mechanics you already know? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into an absolutely legendary, unbreakable life. Keep exploring, stay curious, and we'll get you next time.